What do you get when you cross XCOM with a roguelite? Well, Shardpunk Verminfall if you believe the Steam page, and to some extent they're actually right since it's a tactics sci-fi game with limited roguelite elements. Though I would also splash in a little bit of Left 4 Dead in there too, and in spite of this, the game this weirdly reminded me of while playing through it was sadly the forgotten tactics title called Halfway, even sitting around the same difficulty until you learned how to break the mechanics in each of the games. Now, in Shardpunk Verminfall, which I will undoubtedly call Vermintide at least once, the objective is a lot more simple though. You're running from an overwhelming swarm of humanoid and technically advanced rats hell-bent on destroying humanity, and you're escorting a key tool and fighting back against them while strapped for time, supplies, and even manpower. The story sadly does not get much more complex than that though, which is mildly disappointing since I would have liked to see a bit more development for each of the characters, even if it was just in the camps and safe rooms that serve as intermissions between tactical encounters, since this would have added so much flavor to them outside of their short introductory descriptions. This would have also incentivized more runs of the game for me since it would have felt like there was more to unlock each time through, rather than just going for achievements to get the currency to unlock the other handful of characters and in-mission upgrade possibilities. Instead, the only real replayability would be in increasing the difficulty or enacting self-imposed limitations on the runs themselves. And while I enjoyed the core gameplay loop during my first playthrough and had fun with it, it sadly felt like a chore to do a second playthrough. Now, this may be partially because I beat the game on my first try in around 7 hours, and I could see replaying it if one of my flub-ups had cost me the run. But by reaching the end, all the potential surprises were gone, and beating it with a slightly different crew would not restore that. And the unlocks themselves aren't really that enticing either, sadly, since while they do offer a little bit of unique flavor for each of their builds, letting you experiment with different ways of supporting the characters, the majority of your turns will be spent either setting up overwatch and cover, grabbing loot, or picking off the more dangerous vermin with the weapons at your disposal, not really using these other unique skills you get by leveling up or by unlocking features. This is because the unlocks basically amount to 3 things: more character options, more upgrade choices for your characters, and more upgrade choices for your party. And for the most part, after you get a couple missions into the game, which ones you'll want to grab for your personal playstyle will be extremely obvious, while the others will just not seem tempting at all. Now, up to this point, I probably have been sounding a little harsh, and I would like to restate, I do actually like the game. Getting to the end was fun. I was constantly looking for good positions to set up on the map round to round, how to stagger my cover and overwatch, where to use my bot, and how to free it up to unlock bot-specific objectives, all while keeping in mind that I knew I would need to save my resources since the swarms would just get more intense later in the game, and there are no shops where you can just buy more grenades. The action point system worked well in battle, as did the weapon heat, so you couldn't just post up on Overwatch for all of eternity without setting up specifically for it. I even had fun setting up one character to be hyper-focused on mobility so they could snatch all the resources in an area, while my other characters got bonuses for being stationary and could overwatch multiple turns to protect my grabber. And the cover system in most cases was solid, and the enemies used it too, which I have to give credit to them for. The enemies actually did use cover effectively if they were ranged, rather than charging in and dying to overwatch in a vain attempt to get a better hit chance, like you see in several other games. I think I only really feel 3 gripes whenever it comes to the actual combat, one of them being personal preference, the other 2 being mechanical quirks that could be fixed. On the personal preference end, I hate the right click for action, but unfortunately, at least whenever I played through, this function could only be bound to the mouse buttons. I tried middle click for a while, but ended up going back to right click and would have preferred being able to set it to a keyboard key, because more than once, I would nuke myself trying to close a menu with right click, since in other games I've played recently, right click does just deselect what you're doing. The 2 mechanical quirks, though, are things that I do hope they look at, starting with the cover issue. While I praised it earlier, there is an oddity where if a character is taking cover on the corner of a solid wall, they have excellent view angle in the hallway, and this is how it should be. The oddity is if you have a character one step back from them. Not even at an angle, just literally along the same surface of the wall that you would normally be able to see around it on. The person's view angle, though, would end up actually being atrocious around the corner, making stacking up Overwatch on a corner like that kind of pointless. Similar things impact area of effect skills in weird ways, and more than once I've been kind of hard blocked by pillars in weird ways since they are full cover like a wall as well, and if you're not right up on it, pressed against it getting cover from it, you cannot see around it very well. The other mechanical quirk is enemy spawns. I get that swarms are necessary, they're important to the narrative and to the tension of the gameplay, but on more than one occasion I had enemy packs spawn in on top of my characters, immediately surrounding one or all of them, which can get exceptionally nightmarish whenever you start getting exploding enemies that do this. They could have easily put in an exclusion zone around the characters to prevent this, since it often feels cheap rather than difficult or strategic. This, combined with the fact that the vast majority of the difficulty comes from simply overwhelming numbers that can belch you if you get bad damage RNG, especially when armor appears, and it can get more frustrating than strategic, like I said, if you're extremely unlucky. And there were a few instances where I was close to losing out because of this bad RNG rather than bad tactics. I would have much rather had more of those random global buffs and just added more challenges to strip them than to have more enemies spawn to fluff the difficulty, which you see a lot of in the final mission especially, which made me glad I saved grenades and shards due to the writing on the wall. I actually personally really wish there were more instances of encounters like the cave runs to blow up shards, or certain boss fights where you had to destroy its healing pods to really do enough damage per turn to stop it, or even the bridge level, etc. There were far more interesting than the majority of the maps, and if there was more of that, especially if there was more of that to actually discover by playing, it would justify more playthroughs for me. More unique missions rather than just more Left 4 Dead swarms on most of the missions would be a godsend. Now, as I write the notes for this video, there is a weird dichotomy about the game for me that is hard to bring across, since it really does drag up a weird loop of, I like this, but that doesn't work situations that make it feel negative overall on the review, and that does somewhat summarize the game for me on an odd level, since, weirdly enough, I actually liked the game, but everything I liked does come with that caveat. And that is an oddly common thing when critiquing games that are either solo developer or small team driven, which this game admittedly is. This is because while a game like this can have an extremely focused path it will follow, especially if the devs are good at avoiding feature bloat, and it will benefit from that, it can also end up having narrow vision as well, which ends up with a blind spot in quality of life or quality assurance, which actually that last one's kind of surprised me because I never ran into any major bugs personally, but we did run into a few of those quality of life issues. Thankfully, the developer is fairly active, at least on the Steam page, and is working on various ways to improve it, and is squashing bugs others have found that I never personally ran into. So there is a decent chance that even within a week or two of this review, if not sooner, some of this may very well have been improved on or changed as well. So while I cannot travel back in time to update this video with patch information, I do have to give props to the dev for doing what even major studios often fumble at, and I wish I saw more developers do with their games like this that have strong bones. So all that said, does this seem like a game you could get into, or are you going to wait for it to bake a little bit more first? Mention it down below, and since I do need to appease the YouTube overlords, be sure to drop a like or even a subscription if you want to see more game reviews, news, and even guides at times.